Dr. Schwartz, was the Israeli decision to close Al Jazeera justified?
Yes, very much so. I think it should have happened long ago. I think the role that Al Jazeera is playing is a very destructive role. It is the mouthpiece of an enemy state in our case, Qatar. Qatar is playing a very destabilizing role in the Middle East in general, and certainly in this case, they're the backers of Hamas. It's a propaganda tool using incitement against Israel, broadcasted to tens of millions, in fact, hundreds of millions of Arabs across the Middle East. We know of cases that reporters of Al Jazeera disregarded the orders of the IDF and disclosed places where units were and, army personnel, soldiers. So there's no reason why an enemy can use propaganda and psychological warfare inside the state of Israel while we are in a state of war.
There's no doubt that the coverage of Al Jazeera is consistently anti-Israel, both on its English language channel and even more so on its Arabic channel. But the government justified its decision to close it down, saying it endangers Israeli security. And you also just now mentioned it mentioned the location of Israeli forces. Can you give us some concrete examples of this?
But the picture is even broader because we know that there's an imbalance between Israel and Hamas. Israel itself, the Israeli army with its aircraft and tanks, is of course much stronger than Hamas. So what can Hamas use? What are the assets that Hamas can use? They use psychological warfare, they use public opinion, they use the international media, and they use propaganda. So you have to take into account that broadcasting 24/7 false accusations against the state of Israel, for example, the case of the hospital at Ahli that we remember from the beginning of the war. Then there was the cases of Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian women. Lately, they have the charge that there's famine in Gaza, even though that we see lots of food inside Gaza. So it's much more than even just cases of discovering or disclosing positions of the Israeli army. It's simply being one of the, another battalion supporting Hamas. So there is no reason why Israel should let that happen during war.
On the other hand, Israel prides itself on being the only democracy in the Middle East. A democracy must allow media outlets to operate that are against government policy. The Foreign Press Association called the decision a dark day for the media and warned that it may be only the beginning, and other media outlets may also be closed down. Do you think other media outlets should be closed down?
I think this is very hypocritical. I want to remind you that the European Union stopped the broadcasting of the Russian television across the European Union. Canada did the same after the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. So, having criticism of the Israeli government is something that happens quite a lot in Israel if someone follows the Israeli media. That's not the case. We're in the state of a war. That's a propaganda tool by the government of Qatar, which is, by the way, playing a very destabilizing role inside the Middle East.
It's also playing a key role in the attempts to reach a new truce and release the hostages.
That is correct. That is because Qatar is, having a very smart and sophisticated foreign policy. But we know that they're not exactly mediators. We know that their goals are aligned with the goals of Hamas. That's a criticism that I have, from the beginning of the war and even before that. We gave Qatar a role much bigger than it should have been. And I think Al Jazeera's closing could actually help us because the more Qatar will feel pushed and the more Qatar will feel on the defensive, they might have an interest to push Hamas into a hostage deal.
If you look back, the Israeli courts have been very reluctant in the past to close down media outlets that have been hostile to the state or critical of the state. Al Jazeera say they will take this to the High Court. Do you think there is a possibility that the High Court will overrule this government decision in this case?
Well, it is difficult to guess about Israeli High Court. I hope they will not interfere. I think that the framing of this as an issue of freedom of speech is the wrong framing. This is a case of a state defending itself during times of war. Nothing of this could have been, happening if it was an Israeli media. There's a lot of criticism. The issue here is not criticism of the Israeli government. The issue here is a country wishing to stay alive and to win an existential war that it was, waged against in the beginning of October. So I think it's the wrong framing. I hope the High Court will not interfere.
And the decision was only for an initial period of 45 days, which can be extended. Why was it for a limited period of time, do you think? Why didn't the government just decide to close it down once and for all?
That's a very good question. We are all aware that everything around this war is under very, very intense international pressure. We know that the United States has a stake in this. They have a good relationship with Qatar. As you just mentioned before, Qatar is involved in the negotiations over a hostage deal. So there's a lot of other factors being weighed in. I very much hope so. And I think that Israel has played too much on the defensive. I think that this suspension should be continued and actually at least until the end of the war, or at least until we see some other policies in Al Jazeera which will actually function as a real media outlet and not as a propaganda tool of the Qatari government.